My name is Eleanor Grant, and I turned 66 today. I should have been blowing out candles with my son beside me, maybe remembering the years when his father and I would fuss over birthdays in this very dining room. Instead, I was sitting at the head of my own table, surrounded by neighbors, with a glass of champagne in my hand and a knot in my chest. It was supposed to be my celebration, but the woman standing next to my son made sure it was anything but. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, tapped her glass with a spoon and smiled at the crowd. She leaned just close enough so her perfume hit my nose, sweet and sharp. And then she raised her voice. "To Eleanor," she said, her tone dripping with sugar. "May you find some kind of company in these last years of your life, because if it were up to me, you'd die alone." Laughter didn't follow. Instead, the room froze. A couple of my neighbors shifted uncomfortably, and one guest coughed into his napkin. My son's face drained of color, but he said nothing. I set my glass down carefully, though my hands trembled. My husband Richard had only been gone 6 months. He died believing his family would take care of me, believing his son's marriage would bring comfort, not cruelty. Sitting there, under the weight of my daughter-in-law's smirk, I felt the anger push through my grief like fire through dry wood. I looked straight at her and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "You have 10 minutes, I said. My voice did not shake. 10 minutes to disappear from my house before you see what happens next." Her smile faltered. She glanced at Lucas, as if waiting for him to shield her, but he only stared at me, wide-eyed, silent. The clock on the wall ticked, and with each second my heart beat steadier, harder, like Richard himself was standing behind me. 6 months earlier, the house had felt like a tomb. After Richard passed, every corner echoed with his absence. The chair where he used to read the paper, the porch swing that creaked under his weight, the coffee cup he left in the sink the morning he didn't wake up. I wandered through those rooms like a ghost, unsure how to live without him. My son Lucas tried to be there for me at first. He visited often, but grief is heavy, and he had his own life to carry. Within a few weeks, his visits grew shorter. Then one evening, he introduced me to Vanessa. She was young, beautiful in a polished way that looked expensive, though Lucas said she'd grown up struggling. Her smile was bright, but her eyes flicked around my living room as if she were already measuring the space. She shook my hand warmly, and yet I felt a chill. Their relationship moved at a speed that left me reeling. By the end of the summer, they were married. Not in the church Richard and I had dreamed of for our son. Not with the family gathered, but at a small courthouse ceremony. Lucas came by afterward, still in his suit, and told me I'd have a new daughter-in-law living under my roof until they got on their feet. I remember nodding, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I wanted my son to be happy. That's what Richard would have wanted too, but something about Vanessa's quick, fixed smile made my stomach tighten. At first, she played the part of the grateful newlywed. She brought flowers for the table and thanked me for every dinner I cooked, but her politeness was like a mask that slipped more each day. She began moving my husband's belongings into boxes without asking. She questioned the bills I paid and hinted that the house was too big for just me. Lucas brushed it off, saying she was only trying to help me manage things. I bit my tongue, but each night in the quiet, I whispered to Richard's photograph that something wasn't right. One evening, I overheard Vanessa on the phone in the hallway. She didn't know I was listening. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Once the house is sold, we'll be set. He'll get over it. His mother can't hold on forever." My knees went weak, and I had to grip the banister to stay upright. It was clear then. Vanessa didn't see me as family. She saw me as an obstacle. I kept my silence, but I also kept my eyes open. Richard had been meticulous with his affairs. He'd told me once, during his illness, that he didn't want me to feel unprotected. At the time, I thought it was just a husband's worry. Now, those words came back like a lifeline. That night, standing alone in the hallway, I made a promise to myself. If Vanessa tried to strip me of my dignity, I would not go quietly. I would be ready. The birthday gathering should have been a simple affair. Cake, candles, a few neighbors who still stopped by to check on me. But under Vanessa's control, it turned into something far larger, something that felt less like a celebration and more like a stage. She insisted on planning everything. She ordered the food, arranged the decorations. She told me, in that clipped way of hers, that it would cheer me up. When I walked into my own dining room that evening, I barely recognized it. The table was covered in glittering cloth, trays of catered hors d'oeuvres lined the counters, and bottles of champagne stood ready in buckets. My neighbors whispered compliments, but I felt like a guest in a place I had lived for decades. Lucas tried to smile at me, nervous, as if sensing my discomfort. He poured me a glass of champagne, but his hand trembled. Vanessa glided through the room, greeting everyone with a perfect hostess's grace, her eyes darting to me every few seconds like a hawk circling its prey. When the time came for the toast, I braced myself. She tapped her spoon against the glass, flashing that polished smile that never reached her eyes. "To Eleanor," she began, her voice smooth and theatrical. 66 years. That's quite an achievement. And may you find some kind of company in these last years of your life, because if it were up to me, you'd die alone. The room froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator. A neighbor shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. My son's mouth opened, but no words came out. I felt my chest tighten, the ache of grief colliding with the sharp sting of humiliation. Richard had been gone only half a year, and now, on the day meant to honor me, I was being mocked in front of friends and family. I placed my glass down carefully, as if any sudden motion might shatter me. But inside, something else stirred. Anger. Resolve. Richard had warned me this could happen. He had made plans for me, protections I hadn't fully understood until now, and I had promised myself that if Vanessa ever crossed the line, I would not stay silent. I straightened in my chair, feeling the eyes of the room on me. "You have 10 minutes, I said, my voice calm but cutting through the silence. 10 minutes to disappear from my house before you see what happens next?" Vanessa's smile wavered, but she quickly covered it with a laugh. "Oh, come on, Eleanor, it's just a joke." No one laughed with her. Lucas looked at me, his face pale, caught between the woman he'd married and the mother who had raised him. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. My heart beat steadily as I glanced at the clock again. 10 minutes. That was all the time she had left before the truth arrived at my door. I did not count out loud. I didn't need to. The clock on the wall did it for me, each click drawing a line between the person I had been and the woman I was about to become. I rose from my chair, nodding to a neighbor who had known Richard since high school, and walked to the kitchen. The phone was already in my pocket. My hands were steady when I called Michael Hartman. He answered on the first ring. I could hear office noise behind him, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of a radio. "Eleanor," he said, not asking how I was because he knew better than to waste time when I used that tone. "Is it happening?" "It is," I said. "She did it in front of everyone." "I'm 2 streets over," he replied. "Give me 8 minutes." I set the phone beside the coffee maker and drew a breath so deep it hurt. 8 minutes. I could hold a lifetime inside 8 minutes if I had to. I filled a glass with water and drank half, letting the coolness wash away the heat in my cheeks. Then I went back into the dining room. Vanessa stood by the dessert table, laughing too loudly at something no one else found funny. Lucas hovered, wringing his hands, the way he used to when he was a boy and thought he'd broken something precious. I passed him and touched his arm. He flinched, ashamed of his own silence. "Mom," he whispered, "you didn't mean it, right? The 10 minutes?" "I meant it," I said. "Stand with me or stand aside." He swallowed and looked at his shoes. The clock ticked again. The room had shifted. Conversations had thinned, replaced by a hush full of watching. Neighbors avoided Vanessa's eyes. A friend from church took my hand under the edge of the table and squeezed, a small, steadying pressure that felt like a prayer. 7 minutes. Vanessa approached me, all grin and gloss, as if we were actresses in a scene she could still control. "Eleanor, darling," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Let's not make a spectacle. People might talk." "They already are," I said, and she snatched her hand back as if my skin had burned her. 5 minutes. I pictured Richard in his workshop, the careful way he measured wood, the way he doubled every knot in the rope swing he hung for Lucas. He had built our life with patience. That was the gift he left me, patience with a spine of steel. 3 minutes. The doorbell rang once, then again, firm and punctual. Vanessa glanced toward the foyer and laughed that brittle laugh. "Who on earth?" "Truth," I said, and walked to let it in. Michael Hartman stood on my porch, hair a little mussed by the wind. He gave me a brief nod and stepped inside as if he had done it 100 times, because he had, back when Richard was alive and they would sit at this very table arguing about baseball and trusts in the same breath. "I brought what Richard asked me to bring," he said quietly. "Are you ready?" "I have been ready since the day he made me promise," I said. We entered the dining room together. The crowd parted without being asked. Even Vanessa took a small step back, the way people do when they see a storm coming and realize it is headed straight for them. Michael set his leather briefcase on the tablecloth, snapped it open, and removed a flat envelope with Richard's handwriting on it. My breath caught. I would have known that slanted script anywhere. Michael did not read the letter out loud at first. He asked the room for a moment, and for witnesses. The neighbors stayed. Lucas nodded, pale and rigid. Vanessa crossed her arms and rolled her eyes but didn't dare leave. "This is a letter from Richard Grant to his wife, dated 3 weeks before his passing," Michael said, his voice measured. Accompanying it are instructions related to the Grant Family Trust. He asked that, if Mrs. Grant were ever publicly humiliated or pressured regarding her home, I make certain provisions clear. Vanessa scoffed. "This is ridiculous." Michael ignored her. He unfolded the letter and began to read. Richard's words filled the room. He told me he loved me, that he knew grief could make wolves look like shepherds. He reminded me that the house was protected by the trust, that my right to live here was secure for the rest of my life, and that anyone who sought to coerce me or isolate me would find themselves excluded from any benefit the trust might provide. He placed the letter beside the envelope and drew out a second document. "This is a notice of no contest clause and a statement of intent regarding elder abuse concerns," he said. "If anyone contests Mrs. Grant's rights or engages in coercive behavior, they forfeit distributions. The trustee is empowered to act immediately." Lucas pressed his lips together. "Dad wrote that?" "He did," Michael said gently. "He also asked me to make sure you saw it if the time came." The silence that followed felt heavier than any toast. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Michael wasn't finished. He took out a slim, labeled folder and set it beside the letter. Mr. Grant authorized a limited investigation while he was ill, he said. He did not want to believe anyone might take advantage of his wife. He asked me to verify that everything around her was safe. Vanessa's chin lifted. Are you accusing me of something? Michael opened the folder. He laid out printed screenshots of messages and a few photographs taken in public places. Vanessa meeting a man at a bar on a Tuesday afternoon when she'd told Lucas she was at a dental appointment. Vanessa handwriting notes about potential listing prices she'd discussed with someone who was not a realtor. Vanessa typing words that made my stomach twist. Sell the house. Press him. She can't live there alone forever. Lucas stared at the table as if the documents might vanish if he didn't blink. Nessa? He whispered, using the pet name that suddenly sounded childish. She laughed too loudly. This is outrageous. You're spying on me. Michael kept his gaze on Lucas. Some states allow one-party consent for recordings. We did not rely on those. We relied on witnesses, public records, and your father's explicit instructions to protect your mother. Nothing here was obtained illegally. I didn't gloat. I thought I might. But I didn't. Instead, a strange calm took hold, the kind that sometimes comes right before rain. Richard had prepared this. He had known I would need proof, not pride. Lucas lifted a shaking hand to his mouth. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. Vanessa's silence answered for her. Her eyes darted from the photos to the letter to the ring on her finger, as if calculating what she could still keep. Michael turned one final page. There is also a proposed stipulation, he said, sliding a pen from his pocket. If Mrs. Cole agrees not to contest Mrs. Grant's rights to residence and assets, and agrees to no further contact intended to intimidate or coerce, the trustee will forego seeking additional remedies. If she refuses, we proceed. What remedies? Vanessa asked, voice flat. Civil, he said, and referrals if necessary. Lucas folded, as if the air had gone out of him. Nessa, please. For a moment she met my eyes. I did not hate her. I simply would not be erased. Choose, I said. Choose decency. She did not choose decency. Not at first. She chose a tantrum. Words spilled out of her like sparks, each one lighting something on fire. She called the evidence fake, called Michael a vulture, called me a manipulator. But the room had shifted against her, and sound alone could not move it back. Michael waited. He had the patience of a man who has watched storms blow in and blow out again. When her voice finally cracked, he tapped the stipulation with the end of his pen. You don't have to like it, he said. You just have to decide. Lucas spoke then, his voice raw. I married you because I believed in you. If you love me, sign it. She looked at him as if he had betrayed her, when in truth he had only, finally, seen her. The fight went out of her shoulders. She took the pen. Her signature shook, a jagged line that still counted. Michael gathered the papers. You will vacate the premises this evening, he said calmly. You will make no attempts to pressure or harass Mrs. Grant. Any violation will be documented and acted upon. Vanessa lifted her chin. You think you've won. This isn't a game, I said quietly. It's my life. She swept past me, leaving the scent of her perfume behind like a closing curtain. A neighbor exhaled. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed back to life, as if the entire structure had been holding its breath with us. Lucas stayed after everyone else had gone. He washed dishes without being asked, the way he did when he was 16 and sorry. Mom, he said, staring at the soapy water. I should have listened. I'm sorry. I dried a plate and touched his back. We move forward, I said. That's what your father would want. Michael left the documents with me and promised to follow up in the morning. When the door closed behind him, the house felt strange, emptied of threat, full of echoes that were finally only echoes again. That night, I slept without waking to listen for footsteps in the hall. I did not dream of arguments. I dreamed of Richard's hands, steady and sure, building something that would last. Spring came slow and green. I started taking walks after breakfast, the way Richard and I used to do when he felt strong enough. The neighbors waved. I told them thank you for staying anyway. Lucas moved into a small apartment across town and began seeing a counselor. Sometimes he came by with groceries. Sometimes he just sat on the porch and talked about ordinary things. A stubborn client, a new bridge design, a stray cat that waited outside his building every night. He didn't rush his apologies, and I didn't rush my forgiveness. We let them grow at the pace of honest things. With Michael's help, I established the Richard Grant Fund, a foundation to support older adults facing coercion or isolation at home. It didn't need to be. The first grant bought a set of locks for a widow whose nephew kept showing up uninvited. The second paid for a consultation with a social worker. The third covered a week of groceries for a man who had been too proud to ask. On the anniversary of Richard's passing, Lucas and I planted a dogwood tree in the backyard. We stood there in the soft light, listening to the slow thud of our own hearts. Grief did not leave. It changed shape. It learned to sit beside hope without choking it. Sometimes I think about Vanessa. I don't hate her. I picture her somewhere far from here, making different choices, or at least learning what comes of the bad ones. I wish her better teachers than greed and fear. On the night of my next birthday, I set a small cake on the table and lit a single candle. No speeches, no audience. I spoke to Richard in the quiet. "You kept your promises," I said. "I kept mine." Then I blew out the flame and opened the windows to let the cool air in, the house breathing with me like something alive. The porch smelled like rain after dusk.